The rails: card linking, payments infrastructure, and the build versus partner decision. The independent dossier on HeyMax contains a sentence that has been sitting unactioned for a year. The Visa-only limitation on its card maximizer feature is, quote, the single largest addressable market constraint in the consumer product, worth an estimated 50 to 80% more addressable market if it were fixed. This study was commissioned to answer the operator's follow-up question: build it, buy it, or neither. The research changed the question in 3 ways, and it is worth stating them before the evidence. First, the constraint is real, but the reasoning behind the estimate is wrong. Multi-network linking does increase addressable card value substantially, but cards are only about 40% of point-of-sale value in Singapore and Hong Kong. So even perfect 3-network coverage moves observation of total consumer spend from roughly a fifth to roughly 2/5. The correct argument for doing it is not wallet share. It is that a user who holds no Visa card cannot use the feature at all. A total loss, not a partial one. This is a user count problem wearing a value share costume. Second, the standard answer is unavailable. In the West, the response to should we build card linking is no, use an aggregator. That answer does not exist in Southeast Asia. The leading global aggregator serves the United States, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Canada, Sweden, and the United Arab Emirates, with Japan in beta. In this region, partner means partner with a network or a bank. And third, most consequentially, the best-funded specialist in the world concluded this was not a business. In May 2024, Fidel API sold its loyalty business, the platform, the customers, the partners, and its own brand. By December 2025, the remaining company had been renamed and pointed at expense management instead, and the founder's directorship had ended. So this study maps the 3 rails the networks actually sell, prices what nobody publishes, assesses 2 alternative rails seriously, and then does the thing the vendor conversation never does. It diagnoses which failures a new rail would actually fix. The answer to that diagnostic is the most useful thing here, and it is not a purchase. Let's begin. Chapter 1: 3 different things get called card linking. I want to begin with the mistake, because nearly everybody makes it, and because making it is what turns a tractable decision into an intimidating one. The most common error in a build versus buy analysis of this category is treating one phrase as one product. Card linking is not one product. It is 3. Their access barriers differ by an order of magnitude, and only one of the 3 is the thing HeyMax actually needs. Let me take them in order. The first is offer presentment. This is fetching a catalog of merchant-funded offers and putting them in front of a user. Spend here, get this much back. At bottom, that is a content problem rather than a plumbing problem. To do it, you need merchant relationships of your own, or you need access to a network's offer inventory. What you do not need is any privileged view of anybody's spending. The second is transaction observation. This is receiving a notification when an enrolled card is used. In engineering terms, it is a webhook, a message the network pushes to your server, unprompted, the moment something happens. The content of that message is the whole game. It says, in effect, this cardholder just spent this amount at this merchant. Nothing more and nothing less. That is the rail card maximizer needs. It is the only one this study is really about, and I want to be blunt that everything else in these chapters is scenery arranged around it. The third is merchant-funded settlement. This is the network actually moving money, issuing a statement credit on the cardholder's account that the merchant pays for. This is by a distance the hardest here. It requires merchant enrollment, acquirer participation, and commercial agreements. The acquirer, for anyone who does not live inside payments, is the bank on the merchant's side of a transaction, the counterpart to the issuer on the cardholder's side. Getting acquirers to participate is a commercial negotiation, not an integration. Now, here is why that distinction earns its place as the first chapter. Conflating the 3 tiers inflates the perceived difficulty of the middle one, and the middle one is the one that matters. If you believe that merely observing a transaction requires you to have signed merchants and enrolled acquirers, you will conclude that this is a multi-year enterprise program with a legal department attached. It is not. It only looks that way when the three tiers are stapled together into a single mental model. And there is a specific piece of evidence that makes the separation actionable rather than merely conceptual. It sits inside Visa's own description of its API, and it reads, quote, "Programs can also be executed without merchant participation." I would call that single clause the technical permission slip for an observer-only architecture. Let me spell out what it authorizes. A rewards app can subscribe to a filtered stream of transactions on the cards its users have enrolled, watch that stream, and pay rewards out of its own profit and loss. No merchant signs anything. No acquirer is involved. The reward is funded by the app's own margin rather than by a merchant's marketing budget, and the network is never asked to move a cent of anybody else's money. That converts the hardest of the three tiers from mandatory to optional. And notice what it means for HeyMax specifically. This is precisely the design that Card Maximizer already uses. The architecture was not a compromise or a workaround invented to get around a locked door. It is a documented and supported mode of operation, and now there is a line in the network's own material confirming its legitimacy. There is a second structural insight sitting in the same evidence, and it is worth holding onto because it reorganizes how you shop for this thing. In Visa's architecture, an offer is not a discount. An offer is a subscription to a filtered transaction stream. You define the filter, these merchants, this spend threshold, this frequency, this window of time, and what comes back to you is the subset of transactions that match it. Once you see that, the product becomes legible. You are not buying a promotions engine. You are buying selective visibility into spending. And the selectivity is the product. The value is not in the pipe. It is in your ability to specify exactly which drops come through it. Mastercard, working from the other end, makes the same separation explicit in the way it packages and sells. The transaction notification signal is sold as its own product, separately from the merchant-funded settlement product. Signal and settlement are unbundled. You can buy one without the other. For a company that rewards from its own margin rather than from a merchant's, that unbundling is not a detail of the price list. It is the entire purchase. You want the signal. You do not want the settlement machinery, the merchant enrollment, the acquirer participation, or the commercial agreements that ride along behind them. Both of the networks that publish anything at all have arranged their products so that you can take the one without the other. So here is the working definition for the rest of this study. When I say card linking, I mean transaction observation. Tier 2. A user enrolls a card, the network tells us when that card is used, and we decide what to do about it. Offer presentment is a business development question, and we can answer it separately. Merchant-funded settlement is a tier we can decline entirely, with documentation from the network stating that declining it is a supported choice rather than a degraded one. Everything downstream of this chapter, what it costs, who will sell it to us in this region, whether we should build it ourselves at all, becomes a very much smaller question once it is asked about Tier 2 alone. Chapter 2, the Real Constraint. Now the coverage arithmetic, because the strategy documents have been carrying a number that is directionally right and analytically misleading. And the difference between those two things determines what you should actually go and do on Monday. Start with what cards can see it all. Independent payments data puts cards at roughly 40% of point-of-sale value in Singapore and about the same in Hong Kong. That is not a market share of wallets or a share of users. It is a share of value moving across the counter. The other side of that ledger is more striking. Digital wallets are now ahead of cards in Hong Kong at roughly 45% of point-of-sale value. In Singapore, wallets sit at 36%, which is close behind and closing. And then add the real-time account-to-account rails on top, Pay Now in Singapore, and its equivalents across the rest of the region. money moving directly from one bank account to another, instantly, at no cost to either side. A large and growing share of consumer spending in these markets never touches a card network at all, and what never touches a card network is permanently invisible to card linking. Not hard to see. Not expensive to see. Invisible, structurally, forever, no matter how many networks you integrate. So here is the honest arithmetic on multi-network linking. It plausibly lifts addressable card value by 60 to 105% over a Visa-only position. That is my estimate, and it carries caveats. Different sources measure card mix differently, and the range is wide for a reason. But lift coverage of total consumer spend, and the picture changes shape. You go from roughly 20% of total spend observed to roughly 38%. Doubling a fifth gets you to 2/5. It does not get you to completeness, and no combination of card networks ever will. Compare that against the number the dossier has been carrying, that fixing the Visa-only limitation is worth an estimated 50 to 80% more addressable market and is the single largest addressable market constraint in the consumer product. The direction is right. The framing is wrong. And the wrong framing leads you to the wrong justification, which in turn leads you to the wrong sequencing. Which brings me to the reframe that I think is the most important paragraph in this chapter. The value share framing is the wrong argument. The user count framing is the right one. A Singaporean who carries only a Mastercard cannot use Card Maximizer. Not partially. At all. The feature is invisible to them. The onboarding path dead ends. The product's most differentiated mechanic never activates for that person, not even a little. That is not a percentage of a wallet lost. That is a whole user lost. And the loss compounds, which is the part that gets missed when you model this as a share of spend problem. That user also never becomes a habitual earner. They never cross a redemption threshold. They never enter the accumulation state that the liability study in this series identified as the place where engaged members actually live. One failed card link at the front door removes a person from every downstream stage of the funnel at once. You do not lose 40% of their value. You lose the person. So, multi-network linking is worth doing. I want that stated plainly before I complicate it. But the reason to do it is that some users cannot participate, not that participating users are only partly observed. Now the second reframe, and it is the uncomfortable one. The binding constraint may not be attribution at all. Haymax's own merchant-facing materials cite a catalog of 500-plus brands. The leading white-label commerce infrastructure provider in this space cites 50,000-plus merchant programs. I want to be careful here because those two numbers are not measured identically, and a direct comparison is an estimate rather than an audited fact. One counts brands in a curated consumer-facing catalog. The other counts programs available across an infrastructure layer. They are not the same unit. But 2 orders of magnitude is not a rounding difference. Whatever definitional slack you allow for, the gap does not close. And the consequence is brutally simple. A user who shops at a merchant that Haymax has no relationship with earns nothing, regardless of which rail is installed underneath. It does not matter whether you are observing their Visa, their Mastercard, their American Express, their bank account, or all 4 at once. If the merchant is not in the catalog, there is nothing to attribute the transaction to. The signal arrives, and it lands on an empty shelf. Catalog breadth is a business development problem. It is solved by people, relationships, and contracts. No amount of payments infrastructure substitutes for it, and no vendor in this category sells a fix for it. Hold both facts together, and the decision reframes very cleanly. Multi-network linking is worth doing for user count reasons. That is a real conclusion, and I will not soften it. But it is one of several fixes to a problem whose largest components may lie somewhere else entirely, possibly in an empty catalog, possibly in failures that have nothing to do with which network the card was issued on. That is what the diagnostic in Chapter 10 establishes, with a taxonomy of the distinct ways an earn goes missing. And it is why this study insists that the diagnostic must precede the purchase order. Buying a rail before measuring which failure you have is buying a solution to an unmeasured problem. The measurement is cheap, the rail is not. Chapter 3, Mastercard, the open door. Of the three networks, Mastercard is the one you can evaluate without asking anybody's permission. That fact alone is worth a great deal to a 30-person company, and I want to explain why before I get to the catch, because there is a catch, and it is severe. Start with what is published. Mastercard's developer portal ships a machine-readable index of every documentation page it has. It ships complete open API specifications that you can pull raw as files without a login gate or a sales conversation. And it publishes its full commercial ladder, the tiers, the entry conditions, the service commitments in public. The inbound REST endpoints are documented. The outbound webhook contract is documented. The authentication scheme is documented. The retry behavior is documented. Which means something that is genuinely rare in this category. You can cost a Mastercard integration from your desk today without a meeting. An engineer can read the specification, count the endpoints, size the work, and produce an estimate before anyone has signed a non-disclosure agreement or booked a call. Then there is the commercial ladder itself, which is unusually generous. The first rung is a sandbox, and it is free. In Mastercard's own words, quote, "No prerequisite, you can start today." That is the entire entry condition. The second rung is a trial tier. It is free for up to 6 months with up to 10 real cards. Not simulated cards, real ones, generating real transactions. To reach it, you need an approved use case and a signed basic agreement. The third rung is commercial, which removes the card cap and turns the thing into a production service. And there is a published service commitment attached, within 20 business days per stage. That number is written down where anyone can read it, which itself tells you something about how the product is meant to be adopted. Now read what that ladder makes possible, because I think this is the single most useful operational fact in the whole study. A team can receive real transaction webhooks on real cards for free within about a month. That is enough to build the architecture, enough to prove the product to yourselves, enough to measure the merchant matching problem against live data rather than against assumptions, enough to de-risk the entire design before committing a single dollar of commercial spend. For a company weighing whether to build, that is the cheapest possible way to learn whether it can build. The technical contract is equally legible. What arrives is an outbound webhook to your server over mutual TLS, meaning both ends of the connection present certificates and verify each other, rather than only your side checking theirs. Roughly 30 fields per message, including a card reference, the merchant name, an acceptor identifier, a category code, the channel, and the message type. The delivery behavior is specified too. Retries run over 24 hours with backoff, so a brief outage on your side does not cost you data. Undelivered notifications are stored for 7 days. Payload encryption is available as an option on top of the transport. 3 enrollment modes are offered, and one of them matters considerably more than the other 2. Mastercard hosts a consent interface, a page it operates that your user is sent to, where the card number is entered, described in the documentation as, quote, ideal for PCI-free teams. That phrase is worth pausing on. If the card number never touches your infrastructure, the heaviest ongoing payment card compliance obligations largely do not attach to you. That is the difference between a compliance program with dedicated headcount and an annual audit cycle and a weekend of integration work. For a company of this size, it is not a preference. It is the whole feasibility question. And then the catch. Mastercard's own documentation lists the availability of its transaction notification service as, quote, North America and the EU. Its Insight tokens are listed as North America. Its artificial intelligence merchant matcher, the product that cleans up messy transaction descriptors, is listed as, quote, USA only. Other geographies coming soon. So the product you can sign up for self-serve, on that generous free ladder, with the published 20 business day commitment, is not published as available in Singapore. I want to be careful about how strongly to read that. It is a published footprint statement, not a statement of technical impossibility. Networks routinely support customers in markets their public documentation does not enumerate, through direct agreements that never appear on a developer portal. This deserves a direct conversation with Mastercard's regional team under a non-disclosure agreement before it is treated as final. It is a question to ask, not a door to accept as locked. But taken at face value, it produces the first paradox of this study, and the one that shapes everything after it. The most self-serve rail is the least available where HeyMax operates. And the least self-serve rail, the one with no public documentation, no sandbox, no published pricing, and no way to estimate the work from outside, is the one that actually reaches this market. Which is Visa. Before I move on, though, one thing should be preserved from this chapter, even if the availability answer comes back negative. The trial tier is still the cheapest classroom in the category. Real webhooks on real cards, free, in about a month, forces a team to confront merchant matching, missing transactions and reconciliation against live data instead of against a slide. And every one of those lessons transfers directly to a Visa implementation. The open door may lead somewhere else. It is still worth walking through. Chapter 4, Visa, the Locked Door. Visa is the inverse of Mastercard in every respect that matters here, and the asymmetry is worth stating plainly, because it shapes the whole build versus partner calculation. Start with the documentation, or rather with the absence of it. Visa's card linking platform is designated, in Visa's own materials, a restricted product, and the description of what that means is explicit. Access to its documentation and assets are limited. There is no machine-readable index. There is no public reference specification. If you want the specification, the instruction is to contact Visa directly. 4Ps are named, users, merchants, offers, and rewards, and each is described in outline. Named, outlined, and never specified. You get to know that the doors exist. You do not get to see what is behind them. The practical consequence is the mirror image of the last chapter. You cannot cost a Visa build from outside Visa. No engineer can read the specification and size the work, because no engineer outside a signed relationship can read the specification at all. Any estimate produced without that access is a guess wearing a spreadsheet. And note what that asymmetry does to a procurement process. With Mastercard, the meeting is the last step. You arrive already knowing what you want and roughly what it will take to build. With Visa, the meeting is the first step, and everything you would want to know before walking into it is only available afterwards. That reverses the order in which a small company is able to make decisions, and it is the largest practical difference between the two rails. And yet, here is the reversal. Visa is the rail that reaches Singapore. Its card-linked offers product is live and named in this market. The offer constructs are documented. Catch-all offers, spend-tiered offers, frequency-based offers, new customer offers, online-only offers, lapsed customer offers, and 24-hour offers. That is a genuinely rich vocabulary for describing which transactions you want to see and reward. And Visa-delivered statement credit fulfillment sits alongside it. Most importantly, the Asia-Pacific availability statement carries no country caveat. Compare that with the previous chapter's North America and EU footprint, and the two networks have effectively swapped positions. The one you can read about cannot be bought here, and the one you can buy here cannot be read about. Now look at how Visa actually sells this thing, because the sales architecture is the strategy. The only two published entry points are a form for issuers and a form for merchants. That is it. There is no third door. There is no form for a consumer application, no developer sign-up, no self-serve path of any kind. And the description of the issuer path contains the tell. Issuers are described as being able to, quote, enroll cardholders in the program on their behalf. Sit with that phrase for a moment. On their behalf. That is bulk enrollment performed on the issuer's side under the card agreement the cardholder already signed with their bank. The user does not enter a card number into anybody's form. The bank enrolls its portfolio and the offers appear. The strategic reading follows directly. In Singapore, the realistic route to Visa's card-linking rail runs through a bank, not around one. And I want to be precise about the character of that statement. It is not a workaround, and it is not a second-best path forced on small companies. It is how the product is designed to be sold. Visa built this to be distributed through the institutions that already hold the cardholder relationship. Trying to reach it any other way is fighting the product's own design, which reframes the partnership that HeyMax already holds. The company launched Card Maximizer in partnership with Visa in May 2024. That is not a small thing. In a market where the network sells this capability exclusively through issuer and merchant channels, HeyMax has already walked through a door that most companies never find, let alone open. So the question is not how to get network access. The question is why that relationship has not been extended in the 2 years since. That is a business development question, not an engineering one. It costs no code to ask. And it is very hard to argue that a company should build its own rail from scratch when it has a live network partnership sitting unextended on the shelf. There are 2 further gifts in Visa's documentation that I want to make sure are not lost in a chapter otherwise about closed doors. The first is the observer-only permission from Chapter 1. Programs may be executed without merchant participation. That single clause legitimizes the entire architecture Card Maximizer already runs on, a filtered transaction stream, rewards paid from the company's own profit and loss, no merchant signing anything, no acquirer involved. The second is the settlement option, and it matters more than it first appears. Visa markets outsourced fulfillment with built-in statement credit functionality, delivering the reward to the cardholder on the partner's behalf. Read what that removes from a build plan. A company that does not want to build money movement does not have to. No payout rails, no reconciliation of outbound funds, no treasury operation, no chasing failed disbursements. The network will place the credit on the statement itself, as part of the product. So the honest summary of Visa is this. The door is locked, the specification is behind it, and you cannot estimate the work from where you stand. But it is the right building. The product reaches this market with no country caveat. The architecture HeyMax needs is explicitly permitted. The settlement problem can be handed back to the network, and the company already has a key that it has not turned in 2 years. That combination points somewhere very specific, not to a build, not to a purchase, to a conversation with an issuer, and to a conversation with a network partner that is already, on paper, a partner. Chapter 5, American Express, the closed loop. American Express can be dealt with quickly, and the conclusion is unambiguous. Defer it. But I want to explain why carefully, because the reason is not the one people expect. It is not that Amex is difficult to deal with, though it is. It is that even if every commercial obstacle vanished tomorrow, the rail would still not do the job the product needs done. Start with the structure, because everything follows from it. Most card transactions run on what the industry calls a 4-party model. There is the cardholder's bank, which issued the card. There is the merchant's bank, the acquirer. There is the merchant. And in the middle sits the network, Visa or Mastercard, moving messages and money between institutions it does not own. American Express is different. It operates a closed loop. It is both the network and the issuer. It sees both sides of every transaction made on its own cards, who spent and where. On paper, that should make it the richest data source of the 3 by a comfortable margin. No inference, no reconstruction, no gaps between institutions. One company holding the complete picture. It is instead the narrowest pipe of the 3, and it comes down to one scoping decision. Here is the distinction, and it is the load-bearing sentence of this chapter. Visa and Mastercard scope the transaction stream to the cardholder. Enroll a card, and you see that card's spending. Wherever it goes, whatever it buys, subject to whatever filters you have set. American Express scopes it to the intersection of enrolled cardholder and participating merchant. Partners access the transaction data of enrolled card members only from specific participating merchants. The intersection. Both conditions must hold. The user must be enrolled and the merchant must be a participant. Miss either, and the transaction is not merely delayed or degraded, it is not visible to you at all. The consequence is structural rather than commercial, and I want to be precise about that word. A commercial problem is one you negotiate your way out of. A structural problem is one you cannot buy your way out of because it is the shape of the thing. General spend tracking on American Express is impossible by design. A card maximizer feature, one that tells a user which card to use for a given purchase or credits them for spending anywhere they like, cannot be built on Amex's rail. Not partially, not with effort, not with a bigger contract. The feature promises to observe spending generally, and the rail is scoped to observe spending specifically. And notice what that does to the growth curve of the product. On the cardholder scoped rails, coverage grows when you acquire users. Sign up a user, and you see everything their card does, everywhere. On the intersection scoped rail, coverage is a function of how many merchants your business development team has signed, not how many users you have acquired. Coverage grows with headcount, not with product. That is close to the opposite of what a consumer software company is trying to build. The access terms compound the problem rather than causing it. You need a signed non-disclosure agreement and an executed contract before you see the documentation. Not before you go live, before you read the specification. You must complete security reviews. There is no sandbox. There is no trial tier. There is no published pricing. There is no self-serve path of any kind. You are asked to commit before you are allowed to evaluate. For a small team that is not a pricing objection, it is a planning impossibility. There is no honest way to size the work until after the contract has been signed. Set that beside the previous 2 chapters, and the latter is complete. Mastercard, free sandbox, no prerequisite, start today. Visa, closed documentation, but a live product in this market and a partner path through issuers. American Express, contract first, documentation second, and nothing at all to evaluate before you have signed. There is one more technical detail that deserves attention because it quietly tells you what kind of product this is. Delivery is described as a PI and secure file transfer, with no webhook documented at all. That absence matters. A webhook is a push. The network tells you the moment something happens. A file transfer is a pull on a schedule. No documented webhook implies batch or poll delivery rather than the real-time notification that the product experience depends on. If the reward is meant to feel like a response to what the user just did, a file that lands overnight is a different product with the same data in it. Now the cost of this recommendation, which should be named rather than glossed. American Express cardholders are disproportionately valuable in exactly Haymax's segment. Affluent, travel-oriented, high spending. These are precisely the people a miles-based rewards product most wants to reach, and they are the people most likely to be carrying the card this study is recommending you postpone. Deferring American Express is a real cost. I do not want to pretend otherwise, and anyone presenting this recommendation internally should lead with that rather than bury it. But the sequence is clear. Prove the architecture on the rails that scope to the cardholder, where coverage grows with users rather than with headcount, where the observer-only design is explicitly permitted, and where you can learn what merchant matching actually costs you before committing. Then revisit the closed loop later, from a position where you can bring it volume. A partner arriving with users, transaction history, and a working product is negotiating a different conversation than a company arriving with a slide deck and a request for documentation. The closed loop is not closed forever. It is closed to you now, and the price of admission falls as you grow. Chapter 6, why matching is the hard part. Here is the part that every build plan underestimates. And unlike most of what makes payments infrastructure hard, the evidence for this one is unusually concrete. You do not have to take it on faith. It is published, right there in the field definitions of the messages themselves. The merchant name you receive is 40 characters long. The city is 13. Those are the caps published in Mastercard's own webhook schema, and they are not arbitrary choices made by some product team last year. They are inherited directly from the field lengths of a payments message format that was designed in the 1980s, back when every character crossing a network cost real money, and when nobody imagined that a consumer app would one day need to work out, from those characters alone, which coffee shop a user had walked into on their way to work. 40 characters is not very much, and what arrives inside them is usually not the merchant. What arrives is a string built out of 3 parts that have nothing to do with the brand. A payment facilitator prefix, then an abbreviated brand name, then a store number. Or a wallet intermediary's name sitting in front of the name of the service the user actually subscribed to. Or, in one real example, a ride-hailing company's customer support web address, occupying the field where a merchant name is supposed to live. None of those strings is the brand the consumer believes they paid. The user remembers buying a sandwich. The rail reports a processor code, a truncated word, and a number. That gap is the matching problem, and it is the reason card-linked rewards feel broken to users even when the plumbing is working perfectly. Every single component can behave exactly as documented. The card enrolls. The transaction authorizes. The webhook fires and lands on your server over a mutually authenticated encrypted connection, and if your server happens to be down, it is retried patiently for 24 hours with backoff and held for 7 days after that. All of it correct, all of it on time. And the user still does not get their miles, because nothing in your system could establish that the mangled string in the merchant field was in fact the merchant sitting in your catalog. So let me state the most useful thing I can about this. The networks sell products to solve the matching problem. That, on its own, is the finding. When a network builds and prices a commercial service to clean up its own message format, it is telling you that the mess is not incidental, not a phase, and not something a smart engineering team fixes over a long weekend. It is an admission that the problem is not solvable in-house. Mastercard markets a merchant identifier service that takes, in its own description, raw and messy transaction details and turns them into clear, recognizable merchant information. And Mastercard's own account of why traditional matching fails reads less like marketing than like a diagnosis. Traditional matching, it says, relies on close, character-level similarity. It struggles with truncated or reordered text. It misses matches when formatting is inconsistent. Read those 3 clauses slowly, because between them they describe almost every string that will ever hit your webhook. Truncation is guaranteed by the 40-character cap. Reordering is guaranteed by facilitators and wallets that put their own name first. Inconsistent formatting is guaranteed by the fact that thousands of independent acquirers populate that field however they like. The naive approach, comparing strings for similarity, fails against all 3 at once. An entire vendor category now exists that sells this parsing as a standalone product. That is market evidence, and it points the same way. Markets do not form around small problems, so my recommendation here is blunt. Budget to buy merchant matching. Do not plan to build it. Now the second layer, which I consider worse because it is operational rather than technical. A technical problem can be solved once and then it stays solved. An operational problem needs staff forever. Merchant identifiers are per location, not per brand. Every store gets its own. So a chain with hundreds of outlets is not one identifier to look up. It is hundreds, each of which has to be found, verified, and then kept current as stores open, close, relocate, and change acquirer. Your catalog is not a list of brands. It is a constantly decaying list of terminals. The leading aggregator in this category documented what that actually costs. Identifier requests, in its own words, typically take up to 7 days to complete due to card network constraints. Notice where the delay sits, not in the vendor's engineering, in the networks themselves. That is a floor no buyer can negotiate away. The same aggregator disclosed that identifiers were sourced 5 different ways, and that one of those ways was support staff manually looking the value up. A human being, at the best-funded specialist in the category, typing in a number. That is not a startup cutting corners. That is what the mature state of this problem looks like. And it built something else, which I find the single most instructive artifact in this study. It built an entire missing transaction request interface. A formal, supported path for a customer to say, "This purchase definitely happened, and you did not see it." Requests were held pending for 4 days before they were even submitted. The look-back windows were 90 days for Visa and Mastercard, and 30 days for American Express. Sit with what the existence of that tool implies. The best-funded operator in the world did not treat missing transactions as a defect to be eliminated. It treated them as a permanent, expected volume of work and built product to absorb them. Which brings me to the most practical sentence in this study. A card-linked rewards product must be architected for the earn that does not arrive. A claim flow, a manual queue, a reconciliation window, a support runbook. These are not edge cases to be handled in a later release once the happy path is shipped. They are core product surface, and they need designers and headcount, not a backlog ticket. The proof is that the best-funded operator in the category was still shipping foundational tooling of exactly this kind a full decade after it was founded. The work does not converge. And that leads to the honest accounting, which the vendor conversation will never volunteer. If you are buying card linking in order to reduce missing miles support tickets, you must also count the tickets that card linking creates. New descriptors that fail to match, new identifiers that go stale, new transactions that arrive late or not at all and now generate a claim. The support burden is not eliminated. It is partially transferred and partially duplicated. Chapter 7, The Aggregators and What Happened to Fidel. The standard advice for any company facing a hard infrastructure integration is short, and it is usually right. Do not build it. Buy it. Somebody has already solved this, they solved it for a living, and their whole business depends on solving it better than you would. This chapter is about why that advice fails here. And the evidence I want to put in front of you is not an opinion about market conditions. It is a corporate autopsy. Fidel AP, I was the best-funded card-linking specialist in the world. It offered a single interface across Visa, Mastercard, and American Express, so a client integrated once rather than 3 times. It shipped software development kits that kept the client's own servers out of card data scope, which removed the heaviest compliance burden from the buyer. It had a decade of engineering behind it. When anyone in this category said the words, "Just use an aggregator," this was the company they meant. Here is what happened to it, verified against United Kingdom corporate filings rather than press coverage. In May 2024, Fidel sold its loyalty business. Not a product line, not a customer segment. The platform, the customers, the partners, the personnel, and the Fidel brand itself all sold to another company. By December 2025, the remaining entity had been renamed. Its corporate parent was renamed along with it, and that remaining entity had taken the identical underlying technology, the same transaction observation pipes, and pointed them at expense management, selling transaction data to spend management platforms instead of to loyalty programs. In that same month, the founder's directorship was terminated. His own explanation is the finding, and I will give it to you in his words. It made sense, he said, to spin out the part of the platform that powers loyalty programs and focus on the opportunity we see in spend management. Read that again with the corporate filings alongside it. The best-funded card-linking company in the world looked at loyalty on one side and expense management on the other, using exactly the same technology to serve both, and concluded that loyalty was the part to divest. That is not a company failing. That is a company succeeding at a strategic assessment, and the assessment went against this category. And the pattern generalizes. I went through the card-linking names worth checking, one by one. One had been absorbed into a larger loyalty group with no card-linked product still marketed anywhere. One had a domain that no longer resolves at all. One could not be identified as an operating business in any form. Then look at who is still standing. Cardlytics, Wildfire, Card, Button, PrizeOut. Every surviving player in this category monetizes commerce media or advertising. Not one of them monetizes the linking itself, which yields what I would call the governing principle of the whole category. Pure card linking is not a business. It is a feature of a media business. That principle has a direct consequence for any investment decision here. Whatever a company spends on this rail has to be underwritten by merchant-funded offer revenue, by advertising, by commerce media, by something on the demand side. It cannot be underwritten by the linking technology itself, because the linking technology has never sustained a company on its own. Not once. Not even the best-funded attempt. Now, 3 practical consequences for anyone who still wants to buy. The first is that there is no public pricing anywhere in this category. I checked. Every pricing page returns a not found error. That absence is informative in 3 separate ways. It signals bespoke enterprise contracts rather than a productized offer. It signals a small number of customers because you only hand price when you can count your buyers. And it signals weak buyer leverage because you will be negotiating without a single comparable number in your hand. The second is that the fee structure inverts a consumer app's economics. Card-linking vendors charge per enrolled card and per platform. Those fees scale with signups, but a rewards app's revenue scales with transacting users, which is a much smaller number. So every user who links a card, gets excited, and then never transacts is a permanent cost line with no matching revenue line. The pricing model and the business model pull in opposite directions, and the gap between them widens exactly as the app succeeds at acquisition. The third is that buying does not automatically eliminate compliance scope. This is the promise people assume they are getting when they outsource, and it is not the promise on offer. The specialist's own certification materials are explicit that the client's obligations do not simply disappear. Card data compliance is reduced by using a vendor's software development kit. It is not deleted. Someone at the buyer still owns a program, and that someone has to be hired. And then there is the fact that should end the debate for Southeast Asia specifically, regardless of how the other 3 land. The leading aggregators coverage is the United States, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Canada, Sweden, and the United Arab Emirates, with Japan in beta. Singapore is not on that list. Hong Kong is not on that list. Malaysia is not on that list. So when someone asks whether to build or buy, and the answer in every Western write-up of this question is obviously buy, I want to be precise about what is actually available. In Haymax's markets, the buy option is not expensive. It is not slow. It is not badly priced. It largely does not exist, which changes the shape of the decision entirely. In the West, partner means partner with an aggregator, and the aggregator handles the networks for you. In this region, the aggregator layer is simply missing from the map, so partner has to mean something else. It means partner with a network directly or partner with a bank that already has one. That is the door this study walks through next. But before we go through it, I want to leave the autopsy sitting where you can see it. A decade of engineering, the deepest funding in the category, integrations no newcomer could replicate, and the conclusion that the loyalty half of it was the half to sell. If the most capable company in the world could not make pure card linking into a business, the question for a 30-person consumer app is not whether it can be bought at the right price. The question is what exactly you would be buying into. Chapter 8, Open Banking, the Better Hedge. If cards see only about 40% of what people spend at the point of sale, and wallets and bank transfers see most of the rest, then there is an obvious question sitting there waiting to be asked. Why are we watching the card at all? Why not watch the bank account? which sees everything that leaves it, regardless of which rail carried the money? The answer is a qualified yes. Open banking is a better second rail than a second card network. But there is one large disappointment to clear away first, because a lot of hope has been invested in it, and the hope is misplaced. Singapore's national financial data sharing infrastructure is the wrong dataset. And I want to be definitive about this rather than diplomatic, because it is a question that keeps getting reopened in strategy documents, and it does not deserve to be. That national infrastructure shares balances and positions only. It does not share transaction histories. It will tell you, with the user's consent and in a beautifully structured format, that this person holds a credit card and that the balance on it is a certain amount. It will never tell you that they bought a coffee. It will never tell you where, or when, or from whom. For reward attribution, that makes it unusable. Not limited, not partial. Unusable because attribution is entirely a question about individual transactions, and this dataset contains none. So that question can now be closed rather than revisited every quarter. Commercial open banking providers are an entirely different matter. And one of them does something that nobody else in this entire study does. It publishes a price. A regional provider covering Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, and Korea publishes a rate of 0.5% per transaction. Not a form to fill in, not a call with an account executive. A number on a page in public. I want to draw out why that matters beyond the number itself. In the card linking category, as I showed in the previous chapter, every vendor hides its pricing behind a sales call, and every pricing page checked returns a not found error. The only published price anywhere in the adjacent market comes from the open banking rail. That asymmetry is itself information. Vendors publish prices when they expect to compete on them and when they have enough customers to standardize. Vendors hide prices when each deal is bespoke and buyer leverage is weak. One of these two markets is behaving like a functioning market, and it is not the card linking one. The strategic case for open banking in Southeast Asia rests on three properties, and I would rank them in this order. First, it sees what cards structurally cannot: account-to-account transfers, real-time payment rails, wallet top-ups. This is the majority of regional spending, and card linking is permanently blind to all of it, not poorly served by it. Blind. In a market where digital wallets already exceed cards in Hong Kong, at roughly 45% of point-of-sale value against about 40% for cards, and approach parity in Singapore at 36%, that is not a marginal improvement in coverage. It is a different half of the economy. Second, it carries no payment card compliance burden. No card number ever touches the system, which means the heaviest ongoing compliance obligation in card linking, the PCI program with its annual assessments and its dedicated headcount and its permanent operating line, simply does not arise. Not reduced, does not arise. For a 30-person company with no risk or compliance hires, the difference between a burden reduced and a burden that never exists is the difference between a project and a company restructuring. Third, it requires nothing from merchants. Exactly like the observer-only card architecture I described earlier, where a rewards app subscribes to a filtered transaction stream and pays rewards from its own margin, open banking works without a single merchant signing a single agreement. There is no acquirer to enroll, no merchant business development motion gating the launch. The user consents and the rail turns on. Now the costs, which are real and which I want to state plainly rather than bury. Attribution on this rail is medium reliability rather than high. 3 reasons. Bank descriptors are rawer than network-normalized merchant names, so the matching problem from the previous chapter does not go away here, it gets somewhat harder. Settlement lags authorization, so you see the transaction later than a card webhook would have delivered it, which weakens any experience that depends on immediacy. And consent decays. It expires, it must be renewed, and every renewal is a moment where a user quietly drops out of coverage without ever telling you. Coverage is per bank rather than per network. That is a genuinely different shape of problem. With cards, you integrate a network once and you reach every issuer on it. With open banking, you reach the banks your provider has connected, one at a time, and a user at an unsupported bank is invisible no matter how good your integration is. And the consent experience is heavier than tapping a card number into a form. The user is redirected to their bank, authenticates there, reviews a permission screen, and comes back. Every additional screen in that flow costs conversion, and this rail has several. So I will not oversell it. Open banking is not a clean win over card linking on data quality, and it is not a clean win on user experience. But that is not the comparison that matters. The comparison that matters is against the alternative use of the same money and the same quarter, which is adding a second card network. And on that comparison, open banking wins on every axis I can measure. It is the only rail that sees the account-to-account and wallet spending that is the majority of what this region actually does. It is the only rail in this entire study with a published price. Its regional footprint, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, and Korea, matches Haymax's markets almost exactly, in a category where the leading card-linking aggregator serves none of them. And it carries no card compliance tail at all. As a hedge against the structural fact that this region does not run on cards, open banking is the better second rail than a second card network. Adding Mastercard widens the same window. Adding open banking opens a different one. Chapter 9, the receipt rail. The third alternative has the highest data fidelity of any rail in this study and the most awkward access terms of any of them. Those two facts are not unrelated, and the tension between them is the whole chapter. It deserves a serious assessment rather than a dismissal, because it solves failures that the other rails structurally cannot solve, no matter how much money you spend on them. Start with what it sees, because what it sees is unmatched. It sees the receipt, not a 40-character merchant descriptor mangled by a message format from the 1980s. The actual order confirmation email that the merchant themselves sent to the customer, with line items. Think about what a line item is next to what the card rail gives you. Card linking tells you that a user spent $40 at a merchant. The receipt tells you which product they bought, at what price, in what quantity, on what date, with what delivery, at what discount. For a rewards product that wants to pay differential rates, more for one category than another, more for a first-time purchase of a particular product, more for the items where the merchant funding is richest, this is the only rail that can support that at all. The card rail cannot. It does not have the data, and it never will, because the data does not exist inside a payment message. The merchant knows what you bought. The network only knows what you paid. The receipt rail also solves the failure mode that defeats card linking outright, the aggregator descriptor. When a purchase reaches the card network as a payment processor's name rather than the merchant's own, card linking is blind. Nothing in that string identifies the brand, no matching service can recover what was never sent, and the earn is simply lost. The receipt has no such problem. The confirmation email comes from the merchant, and it names the merchant plainly, because its whole purpose is to tell the customer who they just bought from. So on data quality, this rail wins, and it wins by a wide margin, which raises the obvious question of why anyone uses anything else. That brings us to the barrier, and the barrier is not what most people assume it is. The commonly cited obstacle is the security assessment required for restricted mailbox access. That obstacle is entirely real. It is an independent assessment. It is revalidated annually rather than passed once, and its stringency escalates as your user count grows. I want to underline that last property because it is the one that gets missed in planning. The compliance burden increases as the product succeeds. Growth does not amortize this cost. Growth raises it. You cannot budget for it as a launch expense and then forget about it, because the version you pass at launch is not the version you will face at scale. But that is not the harder constraint. The harder constraint is a policy one, and it cuts at the business model rather than the engineering. The platform's limited use rules prohibit using that data for advertising, for retargeting, or for interest-based targeting. Now read that against the finding from Chapter 7, and the tension becomes very sharp indeed. The monetization model of every surviving company in the card linking category is commerce media. Cardlytics, Wildfire, Card, Button, PrizeOut, every one of them monetizes advertising or media rather than the linking itself, because pure linking has never sustained a business. That is the only proven way to make money from transaction observation. And the receipt rail's terms of access forbid exactly that use of its data. So the rail with the best data in this study is the rail whose data you may least freely monetize. The richest signal comes with the narrowest license. If your plan was to use purchase-level detail to build an audience and sell targeting against it, the plan is not merely difficult here, it is out of bounds, and the platform revalidates your compliance with that boundary every year. Which means the place this rail wins is specific rather than general, and I want to name that place precisely. It wins as a coverage gap filler. Merchants that sit outside the affiliate catalog entirely, where there is no click-through to track and no relationship to attribute through. Purchases that hide behind payment aggregators, where the card descriptor names a processor and card linking goes dark. Transactions on rails that no card ever sees at all. Those are the gaps, and this is the only rail in the study that reaches into all three of them. Used that way, for attribution and for the user experience, the receipt rail is legitimate and it is valuable. You are reading a receipt in order to credit a user for something they actually bought, which is precisely the kind of user-benefiting purpose the access terms contemplate. Used as the raw material of a media business, it is not permitted, and no amount of clever framing changes that. So my sequencing verdict is straightforward. Third rail, not first. 3 instructions go with that verdict. Deploy it where the other 2 rails are structurally blind. Not as a general-purpose attribution layer competing with cards, but pointed deliberately at the coverage holes that cards and open banking cannot close. Its value is highest exactly where the alternatives return nothing. Scope its use narrowly to reward attribution, and write that scope down before anyone builds anything. This is not a compliance formality. It is a product decision that determines whether the rail stays available to you at all, and the annual revalidation is where an undisciplined scope gets discovered. And treat that annual revalidation as a permanent operating cost rather than a one-time project. Put a line in the budget, put a name against it, and expect that line to grow rather than shrink as the user base grows. A rail whose compliance burden rises with success is a rail that must be owned by someone every year, not implemented once and handed to maintenance. Deployed on those terms, the receipt rail earns its place. Deployed on any other terms, it is a permission you will eventually lose. Chapter 10, 7 Ways an Earn Goes Missing. This is the chapter I would want read before any vendor is contacted. Not because it contains a recommendation, but because it changes what kind of decision this is. The build versus buy question presents itself as a procurement decision. It is actually a diagnostic one, and the diagnosis has not been run. Here is the starting point. The dossier records that missing or unattributed miles is the dominant support category at HeyMax. It is the thing users complain about most. The instinctive reading of that fact is that the attribution technology is inadequate and that better rails would fix it. That reading is probably wrong, and the taxonomy is what shows you why. There are 7 distinct ways an earn goes missing. They look identical to the user, who experiences all 7 as the same thing. I spent money, I was supposed to get miles, I did not get miles. But they have radically different causes, radically different cures, and costs that differ by orders of magnitude. Let me take them one at a time. Failure A: the merchant was never in the catalog. The user shopped somewhere HeyMax has no relationship with at all. No rail fixes this. Not one. Card linking cannot attribute a purchase to a partner that does not exist, and neither can receipts, and neither can open banking. This is a business development problem, and the catalog size gap I described earlier suggests it may be the largest bucket of all. HeyMax's own materials cite around 500 brands. The leading white-label commerce infrastructure provider cites more than 50,000 merchant programs. Those numbers are not measured identically, and the comparison is an estimate, but 2 orders of magnitude is not a rounding difference. Failure B: the user forgot to click through. They bought directly instead of routing through the app, so there was no session to attribute. Card linking fixes this where the merchant is enrolled because the card sees the purchase regardless of how the user got there. Receipts fix it more broadly still. Cost to fix: high. Failure C: they clicked, but tracking broke. Cookie loss, browser tracking prevention, ad blockers, the handoff from your app into a browser or into the merchant's own app. A deep link that simply failed. The user did everything you asked of them, and the infrastructure between you and the merchant dropped the attribution. This is fixed by deep link routing infrastructure, which is an established vendor category, available at a fraction of card linking's cost and with none of its compliance load. Cost to fix: low. Failure D: nothing broke at all. The user simply cannot see the pending earn during the 90-day maturation window. The miles were tracked, they were credited, they are on their way, and the user believes they were robbed because the product showed them nothing. This is fixed by product copy and a visible pending state. Cost to fix: near zero. Failure E: they paid with a card that is not a Visa, fixed only by multi-network linking. Cost to fix: high. This is the constraint the entire study was commissioned to examine, and note where it lands in the list. It is one of 7, and it is one of the 2 most expensive. Failure F: they paid by real-time transfer or by wallet. Pay now, an account-to-account rail, a wallet balance, fixed only by open banking or by receipts. Card linking can never see this, however many networks you add to it. Adding Mastercard, adding American Express, adding every network on Earth changes nothing here, because the money never touched a card network in the first place. Failure G: the descriptor was an aggregator. The transaction arrived on the card rail as a payment processor's string rather than the merchant's name, so nothing in the message identified the brand. Receipts fix this because the confirmation email names the merchant plainly. Card linking is blind to it. Now the strategic point, stated as plainly as I can state it. Rows C and D are almost certainly a large share of the support volume, and neither of them is fixed by buying a card linking rail. Row D costs nothing but copy and a status indicator. A sentence telling the user their miles are confirmed and will be available on a specific date. That is it. That is the entire fix for a failure mode where the product is already working correctly and only the communication is missing. Row C is a routing problem with mature vendors, well-understood pricing, and no compliance tail whatsoever. It is bought and installed, not built and certified. Together, those 2 are the cheapest available wins in this entire study. And here is what makes them dangerous to miss. They are completely invisible to a decision framed as which card network do we integrate next. That framing cannot see them. It is not that it weighs them and rejects them. It never puts them on the table at all because they are not rails, and the question was about rails. So here is the prerequisite work item, and I want to be unambiguous that it comes first. Instrument the missing miles queue and split it into these 7 buckets. Every recommendation in this study, including my own, is unanswerable without that distribution. If row A dominates, the answer is business development and no rail purchase is justified. If rows C and D dominate, the answer is a sprint of product work and a routing vendor. If row E dominates, then multi-network linking really is the binding constraint, and the rail investment should be accelerated rather than sequenced behind the free fixes. If row F dominates, cards are the wrong rail entirely, and open banking moves to the front. The same evidence supports 4 different decisions depending on a distribution nobody has measured. And that distribution is derivable from data HeyMax already holds. The tickets exist. The transactions exist. The link attempts exist. This is not new instrumentation of a system that does not yet emit the signal. It is classification work on records already sitting in the company's own systems at the cost of a few days of analysis. A few days. Against a rail purchase that carries bespoke enterprise pricing, an unknown compliance program, and a vendor category that has been consolidating and going dark for 2 years. So let me end the chapter with the instruction rather than the observation, because the instruction is the useful part. Run the diagnostic before you take the vendor meeting. Not after the meeting to validate a decision already leaning, before it, while the answer can still change what you buy. A company that buys a rail before running this diagnostic is buying a solution to an unmeasured problem. Chapter 11, the 2 free fixes. Before we reach the decision this study was commissioned to make, I want to give a full chapter to 2 fixes that cost almost nothing. Not because they are minor, but because they are the highest return items in the entire study. Listing them as 2 lines inside a taxonomy would understate them badly. So they get their own treatment, and they get it here, immediately before the decision chapter, because I want them sitting in your mind while you read it. Here is the context. The dossier records that missing or unattributed miles is the dominant support category at HeyMax. When we split that queue into its distinct failure modes, 2 of them stood apart for a reason that has nothing at all to do with payments infrastructure. One of them costs nothing but product copy and a status indicator. The other is a routing problem with an established vendor category behind it and no compliance tail whatsoever. Together, they are the cheapest available wins anywhere in this analysis, and they are entirely invisible to a decision framed as, which card network do we integrate next? Take the first one. The maturation problem is a perception problem, and perception problems are product problems. There is a 90-day window between the moment a user makes a purchase and the moment the miles from that purchase become redeemable. That window is economically necessary. It matches the merchant's return and validation period. Every affiliate business on Earth has one, and HeyMax is not doing anything unusual by having it. You cannot pay out against a sale that might still be reversed. But look at it from the other side of the screen. From the user's position, an earn that has been tracked but is not visible is completely indistinguishable from an earn that failed outright. They did the work. They routed through the app, they made the purchase, they trusted the product to do its part, and the product showed them nothing. There is no signal available to them that separates success from silence, so they assume the worst and then they open a support ticket. The miles are tracked, the miles are credited, the miles are on their way, and the user believes they were robbed. The fix is not infrastructure. The fix is a visible pending state with a date attached to it. Your miles from this purchase are confirmed, and they will be available on this day. That is the whole intervention. 1 sentence, 1 date, 1 status indicator. It converts a support ticket into a moment of confidence, and it costs a sprint. I want to be blunt about how large that gap is, because the behavioral literature assembled in the earlier study in this series is unambiguous on the point. The earn event must be instant, vivid, and celebrated, even when the redemption itself is delayed. That is the design rule. A silent 90-day gap is the precise opposite of that rule. And it is being tolerated at the exact moment in the relationship when the product most needs to build trust, which is right after a user has taken the action the entire product is designed to encourage. Now the second fix. The tracking breakage problem is a routing problem, and routing problems have known solutions. Here is the failure. A user taps through from the app toward the merchant. The handoff to the merchant's own application fails, or the tracking is stripped somewhere in transit by a browser's privacy protections, by tracking prevention, by an ad blocker, by a deep link that simply did not resolve. The earn is lost. And it is lost through infrastructure that the company does not own and does not control. There is an established category of vendors, deep link routing providers, whose entire business is preserving attribution across exactly that handoff. It is a mature market with real suppliers in it. Buying into it costs a fraction of what card linking costs, and it carries no card data compliance obligation of any kind, because no cardholder data ever enters the picture. And consider what class of failure it addresses. These are failures that occur after the user has done everything right. They clicked through. They followed the path the product asked them to follow. They behaved exactly as instructed, and the product still failed to credit them. Those are the most damaging failures in the entire taxonomy because they punish precisely the behavior the product is trying to build. A user who is punished for compliance learns not to comply. Now, the property these two fixes share, which is what makes them strategically valuable well beyond their price. Both of them improve the experience of users who are already engaged. That distinction matters enormously, and it is worth holding directly against the Rail question. Multi-network card linking expands who can participate in the product. It brings in the user who holds no Visa card and therefore cannot use Card Maximizer at all. That is real, and this study argues for doing it. But these two fixes do something different in kind. They repair the experience of the people who are already trying. The ones who already signed up, already linked, already clicked, already bought. The liability study established where a rewards program's economics are actually made, and the answer was first redemptions and habit formation. That is the moment the relationship either compounds or dies, which means a user who earned correctly and believes they did not is a user whose habit is being actively destroyed by a fixable user experience gap, not by a missing rail, not by a network limitation, by a status indicator that was never built. So here is the sequencing verdict, and I want it stated without hedging. Do these before, not after. They are cheaper, they are faster, they carry lower risk. Nothing about them requires a vendor negotiation, a compliance program, a network approval, or a signed agreement with anyone. Both are weeks of work by people already on the payroll. And there is a second-order benefit that is easy to miss, and that I think is actually the strongest argument of all. Doing these fixes generates the data that makes the larger Rail decision answerable in the first place. Fixing the maturation display removes an entire category of noise from the support queue. Fixing the routing removes another. What remains in that queue afterward is a far cleaner missing miles taxonomy. A distribution you can actually trust, rather than one polluted by tickets that were never about attribution technology at all. You cannot size the Rail problem honestly while two large non-Rail problems are contaminating your measurement of it. Fix those first, and the measurement becomes truthful. Then, and only then, decide about Rails. Chapter 12, Build, Buy, or Neither. Now the decision the study was commissioned to make. Build it, buy it, or neither. I will take the two obvious options in turn, on the evidence, and then explain why the third answer is a real strategy rather than a failure to decide. The case against building is overwhelming. I want to lay out 5 separate strands of it, because any one of them alone would give a company pause, and together they are conclusive. First, the economics of the only company that ever did this properly. The best-funded specialist in this category reached modest revenue against multiples of that figure in operating cost, and then it sold the business. That is not a company that found a hard but profitable problem. That is a company that built the thing, ran it at scale for a decade, and concluded the numbers did not work. Second, network access is not something you purchase. It is granted through partner programs. Even the leading specialist, the most credible technical operator this category ever produced, had to join Visa's FinTech partner program in order to obtain it. If the specialist could not simply buy its way onto the rails, a 30-person consumer app cannot either. Third, the credential that made that specialist acquirable in the first place was more than 20 separate financial institution integrations. Sit with that number for a moment. 20 separate financial institution integrations is not an engineering sprint. It is a decade of business development, relationship by relationship, contract by contract, review by review. You do not compress that by hiring. Fourth, compliance. The heaviest card data compliance tier is not a project with an end date and a completion certificate. It is a permanent annual operating line with dedicated headcount attached to it. It recurs every year forever, for as long as the product exists. Fifth, and most tellingly of all, that same specialist was still shipping foundational merchant identifier management and refund handling tooling in its 10th year. Its 10th year. Not polish, not optimization. Foundational tooling for the basic problems of the category. The work does not converge. There is no point at which you are finished. For a 30-person company with no risk or compliance hires, building this is not a resourcing question. You do not solve it by adding 2 engineers. It is a category error. So not build, what about buy? The case against buying is weaker, and I want to be fair about that. It is also real. And notably, it is mostly a case about the state of the market rather than about the technology. Start with the fragility. The vendor category is financially fragile and consolidating in front of us. The leader was acquired and dismembered. Others have gone dark entirely. One was absorbed into a larger loyalty group with no card-linked product still marketed. One has a domain that no longer resolves. One could not be identified at all. Which means vendor pivot risk here is realized rather than theoretical. This is not a risk register line written by a cautious lawyer. In May 2024, the specialist's customers woke up one morning to a new owner and a changed strategy. That already happened to real customers with real integrations running in production. Then pricing. There is no public pricing anywhere in this category. Every pricing page checked returns a not found error. That signals bespoke enterprise contracts, few customers, and weak buyer leverage. You will negotiate without a reference price against a vendor who knows you have no alternative. Then the shape of the fees, which is subtly hostile to a consumer application. Per card and platform fees scale with signups. Revenue scales with transacting users. Those are not the same population, and the gap between them is precisely where a consumer app lives. The fee structure inverts the economics. Then compliance again. Buying does not automatically eliminate compliance scope. The specialist's own certification materials are explicit that the client's obligations do not simply disappear. And finally, buying does not eliminate attribution disputes either. We know this because the vendor built a self-service missing transaction, API, and it built that precisely because the ticket volume demanded one. The support burden does not vanish on purchase. It is partially transferred and partially duplicated. And then the fact that settles the question for this region entirely. There is no aggregator serving Singapore, Hong Kong, or Malaysia. None. The leading aggregators coverage is the United States, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Canada, Sweden, and the United Arab Emirates, with Japan in beta. So the buy option in Haymax's markets is not expensive. It is largely unavailable. You cannot purchase what nobody sells to you. Which leaves neither, and neither turns out to be a genuine strategy rather than an absence of one. 3 pieces of evidence all point in the same direction. 1. The highest fidelity rail in the world is a distribution position, not a technology purchase. Cardlytics sees roughly 1 in every 2 card swipes in its market. 1 in every 2. And it achieved that not by building superior linking technology, but by sitting inside financial institutions' own channels, reading their first-party data. It never enrolls a card at all. Let that land properly. The most complete view of card spending anywhere was won by position, not by engineering. Position beat technology. 2. The most capable possible builder chose to buy. Visa itself is a client of a white-label consumer rewards platform. The network that owns the rails, that literally operates the infrastructure everyone else in this study is trying to reach, purchases the consumer-facing rewards layer rather than building it. If the owner of the rails does not consider that layer worth building in-house, that tells you something about where the defensible value actually sits. 3. Haymax already holds the seed of exactly the distribution position I have just described and has not exploited it. The company launched Card Maximizer in partnership with Visa in May 2024. And in a market where Visa sells card-linked offers exclusively through issuer and merchant channels, a form for issuers, a form for merchants, and no third door, an existing network partnership is the scarce asset. Most companies never find that door at all. HeyMax walked through it 2 years ago. And the 2 years since have produced no visible extension of it. That is the finding I would put in front of the board, and I would put it there before any vendor conversation begins. The question was never how to get network access. The company has network access. The question is why the access it already obtained has been left exactly where it was found. Chapter 13, The Sequence. Here is the recommendation, ordered by return per dollar and per week. And before the first step, the constraint that governs the whole ordering, because it is what makes this a sequence rather than a list. Every step below is cheaper than the step after it, and each one generates information that the next one needs. That second property is the important one. This is not a wish list ranked by preference. It is a chain. Running it out of order does not merely waste money. It destroys the information that would have told you how to spend the money. Step 1. Diagnose this month. Instrument the missing miles queue and split it into the 7 buckets. Every ticket lands in exactly one of them. The merchant was never in the catalog. The user forgot to click through. They clicked, but tracking broke. Nothing broke at all, and the user simply cannot see the pending earn during the 90-day maturation window. They paid with a non-Visa card. They paid by real-time transfer or by wallet. Or the descriptor that arrived was an aggregator string rather than the merchant's name. And alongside that taxonomy, measure one metric directly. The card maximizer link failure rate. How many users attempt to link a card and cannot because the card they hold is not a Visa? That single metric measures the entire constraint this study was commissioned to examine, and it costs nothing but a query. The data already sits inside the company. Every subsequent decision in this sequence is a guess without it, and a company that buys a rail before running this diagnostic is buying a solution to an unmeasured problem. Step 2. Ship the free fixes this quarter. The visible pending state for maturation, with a date attached to it, and deep link routing to stop attribution breaking after the user has done everything right. Both are weeks of work by people already employed. Both improve the experience of users who are already engaged, rather than expanding who can participate. And both reduce the very support burden that the larger rail purchase was meant to address, which means they also shrink the problem you are about to go shopping for. Step 3. Prototype on the open rail, in parallel and for free. Build against Mastercard's sandbox and trial tier. The sandbox is free, with, in Mastercard's own words, no prerequisite, you can start today. The trial tier is free for up to 6 months on up to 10 real cards, requiring an approved use case and a signed basic agreement. The published service commitment is within 20 business days per stage, which means real transaction webhooks on real cards at zero cost within roughly a month. This is the cheapest possible way to learn whether the company can operate a card-linked product at all. And I mean operate, not integrate. It forces the team to confront merchant matching against live data. The 40-character merchant name, the 13-character city, the payment facilitator prefixes, and wallet intermediaries and support addresses that are never the brand the consumer believes they paid. It forces them to confront missing transactions and reconciliation and the earn that does not arrive. All of that before any commercial commitment, before any signature that costs money. And note the hedge built into this step. Mastercard's own documentation lists the availability of its transaction notification service as North America and the European Union, which makes Asia-Pacific production availability an open question that deserves a direct conversation with the regional team under a non-disclosure agreement. But even if that turns out to be the blocker, the architecture and the operational learning transfer directly to Visa. You do not lose the work, you lose only the vendor. Step 4. Extend the relationship you already have. In Singapore, Visa's card-linking product is sold through issuers. That is not a workaround or a loophole. It is how the product is designed to be sold. The issuer path description says it plainly. Enroll cardholders in the program on their behalf. Bulk enrollment, issuer side, under the existing card agreement. HeyMax has a Visa partnership. HeyMax has bank relationships. Therefore, the realistic path to multi-network coverage runs through an issuer program rather than through a direct integration. And critically, that is a business development motion, not an engineering one. The company can start it immediately, at no engineering cost, while Step 3 de-risks the technology in parallel. The two steps do not compete for the same people. Step 5, hedge with open banking next. It is the only rail that sees the account-to-account and wallet spending that makes up the majority of regional consumption. The spending that is permanently invisible to card linking, no matter how many networks you add to it. It publishes a price, which nothing else in this study does. A regional provider covering Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, and Korea publishes a rate of 0.5% per transaction. It covers exactly HeyMax's markets, and it carries no card data compliance tail because no card number ever touches the system. The costs are real, and I have named them. Attribution is medium reliability rather than high because bank descriptors are rawer than network-normalized merchant names and settlement lags authorization. Consent decays and must be renewed. Coverage is per bank rather than per network, and the consent user experience is heavier than tapping a card into a form. But as a second rail, it beats a second card network on coverage of what this region actually does. Step 6, receipts last and scoped narrowly. Deploy the receipt rail as a coverage gap filler for merchants and for rails the other two are structurally blind to. Purchases behind payment aggregators, transactions no card ever sees. Use it for attribution and user experience, not as an advertising asset, because the platform's limited use rules prohibit using that data for advertising, retargeting, or interest-based targeting. And budget the annual security revalidation as a permanent operating cost rather than a one-time project, because that compliance burden increases as the product succeeds. And then one thing not to do. Do not build. Not the linking, not the merchant matching, not the identifier management. The networks themselves sell products to solve merchant matching, which is an admission that it is not solvable in-house. An entire vendor category exists selling that parsing as a standalone product. Budget to buy it, do not plan to build it. And the broader evidence that this work never converges runs a full decade long, and it ends in a divestiture. Chapter 14, the verdict. The constraint is real, the estimate was right for the wrong reason, and the cheapest fixes are not rails at all. That is the study, in one sentence. Now let me give you the 4 conclusions it rests on. Conclusion 1. Multi-network linking is worth doing, but on user count grounds rather than on wallet share grounds. The value arithmetic is genuinely modest. Total spend coverage moves from about 1/5 to about 2/5. Doubling 1/5 gets you to 2/5. It does not get you to completeness, because cards are only around 40% of point-of-sale value in Singapore and Hong Kong, and the wallet and account-to-account rails carrying the rest are permanently invisible to card linking. So if you make the case on wallet share, the case is weak, but wallet share was always the wrong frame. A user with no Visa card is a whole user lost, not a fraction of one. The feature is invisible to them. The onboarding path dead ends. And the loss compounds through every stage of the engagement funnel the earlier studies in the series mapped, because that user never becomes a habitual earner, never crosses a redemption threshold, and never enters the accumulation state where engaged members actually live. Do it, just do it for the right reason. Conclusion 2. Build is a category error, and buy is largely unavailable in this region. The specialist that proved the technology divested the business. It sold the loyalty platform, the customers, the partners, and its own brand, then renamed itself and pointed the identical technology at expense management instead. And no aggregator serves Singapore, Hong Kong, or Malaysia, so the buy option here is not a question of price. It is a question of existence. What remains is the partnership path. And HeyMax already holds a network partnership that it has not extended in 2 years, in a market where that partnership is the scarce asset rather than the technology. Conclusion 3. The diagnostic must precede the purchase. There are 7 distinct failure modes behind a missing earn. At least 2 of them are fixed by product copy and by routing, rather than by payments infrastructure of any kind. And one of them, the empty catalog, the merchant HeyMax simply has no relationship with, is fixed by no rail at all, at any price, from any vendor. A company that buys before measuring is solving an unmeasured problem, and the measurement costs days. Conclusion 4. The strategic prize is a distribution position, not a technology asset. The highest coverage operator in the world sits inside banks' own channels and never enrolls a card. The most capable possible builder, the network that owns the rails, buys rather than builds. The pattern is consistent across every piece of evidence gathered here, and it points at the same conclusion every study in this series has reached from a different direction. HeyMax's advantage is being close to consumers and to partners. It is not being close to the metal. Now, because an analysis that cannot be wrong is not an analysis, let me tell you what would prove this wrong. There are 4 things, and each of them is checkable. The first, if the missing miles diagnostic comes back dominated by row B and row E, users forgetting to click through, and users paying with non-Visa cards, then attribution technology is the binding constraint after all, and the rail investment should be accelerated rather than sequenced behind the free fixes. That would make me wrong about the ordering, and the ordering is most of my recommendation. It is checkable this month. The second, if Mastercard's regional team confirms production availability in Singapore under a direct agreement, then the self-serve path becomes real. Step 3 stops being a rehearsal for Step 4 and becomes its replacement. The most documented, most self-serve, most cheaply testable rail in this entire study would suddenly be live in the market that matters, and the partnership-first argument weakens considerably. The third, if a card-linking aggregator enters Southeast Asia in the next year, the buy option reopens and the build versus partner calculus changes materially. My case against buying is mostly a case about market availability rather than about the technology itself. Restore the availability, and you restore the option. The fourth, if HeyMax's catalog reaches a scale where ROA stops dominating, where the merchant the user shopped at is usually a merchant HeyMax already has a relationship with, then attribution rather than coverage becomes the constraint. That would be a good problem to have. It would also be a different study. Each of those is testable within 2 quarters, and all 4 of them begin from the same free query. How many people tried to link a card and could not? That is where I would start. Not with a vendor call, not with a contract, and not with a procurement process. With a query against data the company already holds, run by someone who already works there, answerable before the end of the month. It is the cheapest question in this entire study, and it governs the most expensive decision in it. Because everything in this study bends around that one number. If it is large, the rail is the constraint, and the sequence compresses. If it is small, the constraint was never the rail, and the money should go somewhere else entirely. Either way, you will know, and knowing costs nothing. That is the whole argument. The constraint is real. The estimate was directionally right and analytically misleading. The standard answer, buy it from an aggregator, does not exist in these markets. The best-funded specialist in the world looked at this business and divested it. And the 2 highest return moves available are a status indicator and a routing vendor, neither of which requires a network, a contract, or a compliance program. This has been an independent analysis, based entirely on public sources and primary documentation, current as of August 2026. Estimates and analysis are labeled as such, and nothing in it is financial advice. Thank you for listening.